So speaking of this whole, it's always, serpiginous kind of path. It seems to, establish a new life, and especially in another country. But being someone that's from Germany, that's now, been in Australia, how would you say when it comes to being an expat and doing anesthesia, comparing doing anesthesia there compared to Germany? Is there anything strikingly different, or maybe it's just very similar to you? What would you say is like the differences?
Well, in general, I have to say that what Graham said at that time, that was right. A theatre, an operating theatre is an operating theatre, an anaesthetic machine is an anaesthetic machine, and propofol is propofol. There are differences, but they are not major. So the first thing what I noticed is that, but that's not in general in Australia, it's just the hospital where I work, I guess, is that where I work now, we don't have special trained anaesthetic nurses or anaesthetic techs. We have nurses, they are registered nurses, so they went to university for 3 years, they've got a degree, and they're fully trained, and they assist you as the anaesthetist, but they are not specially trained for anesthetics, whereas in Germany, the anaesthetic nurse is a special trained anaesthetic nurse. So at my time when I worked in Germany, they had to go to a nursing school for 3 years, and then they had to do an extra 2 years training for anesthetics in ICU. And they only worked in anesthetics in ICU, anesthetics or ICU. And if they did anesthetics, they only did anesthetics. They didn't scout, they didn't scrub, they only were the anesthetic nurse. In Germany, the anesthetic nurse draws up all the medication, they put the drip in, they put the monitoring on. They are able to look after the patient while you duck out to go to the toilet or have a cup of coffee. Many of the very experienced ones are able to intubate simply because we taught them. It's not part of their role, but worst case scenario, they would be able to do it. They put in arterial lines. I remember in the old days when we did major surgery like Whipple's procedure or radical cystectomy with neobladder or hemihepatectomies, I would put the central line in, whereas my anaesthetic nurse puts the arterial line in. So here in Burney, we have just nurses, and they don't draw up the drugs, they don't put the drip in. It was funny, on my first day at work, we arrived here after a 6-week holiday because we had to wait for our furniture to come with a container ship from Germany to Australia. Did a holiday, travelled from Cairns down to Brisbane and then to Canberra. Anyway, so we arrived here probably a week or 2 weeks before I had to start to work, just to settle in, so for the kids to go to school, and so that I would be at home just to help, this transition phase to make it a bit easier. So anyway, on my first day of work, I went to the operating theatre and I said hello, introduced myself, and there was a patient already on the operating table. I said hello, and I started pre-oxygenating, and I looked at my anaesthetic nurse, and my anaesthetic nurse looked at me, and I said, "Yep, we can start now." "Yes." "Yeah, you can give whatever 100 mics of fentanyl." "You didn't draw up any drugs." What do you mean? Where are the drugs?" "Well, they're all in there in the anaesthetic trolley, but you haven't drawn them up." "Yeah, isn't that your job?" "No, I'm the anaesthetic nurse. You're the anaesthetist. You have to draw up the drugs." "Oh, okay, right. Sorry, apologies to the patient." Open the drawers. Had a look what's where. Draw up the drugs. Okay, drugs are drawn up. And for whatever reason, and then someone must have put a drip into the patient before, because I remember the patient already had an IV going. I found out later that's my job as well. So anyway, so I was standing there and pre-oxygenating again and asking the nurse, "Okay, drugs are drawn up, 100 mics fentanyl, please." "Yes." You have to inject them." "What?" "Yeah, but I'm pre-oxygenating the patient, so I'm going to inject drugs." or I can pre-oxygenate the patient. Okay, so the anesthetic nurse hold the mask, pre-oxygenate the patient whilst I was injecting the drugs. And then we swapped places again, and I was at the head end again, and I back masked the patient and finally intubated the patient. And then I learned that here, the anaesthetist draws up the drugs. And I've been told the reason is so that you can be sure that this syringe contains what you think it does contain. And I thought, yeah, well, what are the stickers for then? I mean, in Germany, the anesthetic nurse draws up the drugs. I walk into the operating theatre, there's a battery of drugs lying on a tray. That's all. And I trust my anesthetic nurse that it's the right thing. It's not just saline solution or something else or water. But anyway, I pretty quickly learned that I put the drip in, I draw up the drugs, the nurse pre-oxygenates whilst I am injecting the drugs, and then I intubate, or I put the LMA in. That was another funny thing. When we did the first LMA, I was just standing there, did a jaw thrust, and looked at my nurse, and the nurse was holding the LMA, and I said, "Yeah, you can stick it in now." "Oh no, doctor, that's your job." So what? In 15 years in Germany, I've never. I mean, that was always the anesthetic nurse, because it's not the anaesthetist or anesthesiologist is standing at the head end. Okay, so I'm doing a jaw thrust because that's from an ergonomic point of view, the easiest way to do jaw thrust is if you're standing behind the patient. Okay, and then if you look at the LMA, the way it is formed, if you think about the anatomy where the LMA has to go, it's much to insert it if you're standing in front of the patient. So the anesthetic nurse puts the LMA in. You can't do anything wrong there. I mean, you just stick it in until it doesn't go any further. You know, you can't put it in the wrong spot. It's completely impossible. No, okay, so right. So I basically, let the jaw thrust go. My nurse was standing in front of the patient, doing a jaw thrust, basically reverse, and I put the LMA in. That was one of the differences that was quite interesting. I have to say, now after almost 12 years here, most nurses are now happy when they work with me to put the LMA in, because I'm just standing at the head and doing the jaw thrust. And now I just don't need to get in. Just get in. I mean, you can't do anything wrong, okay? Just put them out. Okay? That's
yeah.
And most of them are pretty happy. That's just pretty self-explaining anyway.
I think I gotta say, because this is just killing me, because so Melissa's anesthesia, I'm anesthesia, I did pain, so I haven't done anesthesia in a long time, and the way you're describing, I'm like, that's how we do it in the United States. We do everything. Like that's what we do. It just is killing. It's just so funny.
Yeah.
Like we always dried up the drugs. We did all this stuff. Everybody's standing around. You're trying to juggle, masking the patient and getting your syringe ready and put it on the lock. And it's like, you just can't imagine being in the room. Okay.
What do they pay your assistant for? Just standing there looking good?
I don't, it's funny that in some places I work in a surgery center, and like an ambulatory surgery center, just all outpatient, and there's no anesthesia techs. There's a circulating nurse, but they kind of assist with everything, the surgeon and everything else. And there's the anesthesia providers, I'm solo. So I clean stuff. I turn things over. I drop the drugs. I push the drugs. I'm like, literally, I got to lube the eyes, close the eyes for certain kind of cases, and in between while I'm waiting for the rocuronium to kick it. Like, so I'm like trying to time these multitasking situations. So yeah, it's you feel like you need 8 arms sometimes to do all of this stuff. But
and it sounded like the transition for a U.S. trained anesthesiologist, based on like us, juggling everything. This is very comparable than the Australian kind of version of how anesthesia is practiced. Is, I guess you don't have any experience
Here
in the United States, but much more, you are responsible for granular details that ordinarily you wouldn't have been when you were in Germany, is the summary there.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I have to say, this is the way things are done at the hospital where I work here in Burnley. I've never worked anywhere else except for 1 week in where I did a locum at a hospital in the mainland, which was pretty similar. But I can imagine that there might be different hospitals, other hospitals in other states in Australia, where it might be slightly different, where they might have trained anesthetic nurses, not anesthetic techs, that doesn't exist. But the reason it's done this way here, because I've spoken to the nurse unit manager of the operating theatre at that time and asked them, why don't we have special trained anesthetic nurses, or why can't we have a group of nurses, and we as anaesthetists are happy to train them up to get a bit more skills, to put IVs in, to inject drugs, to draw up drugs, to to put LMAs in, or to intubate, and all these things. And then I've been told that they don't want that because if you want to swap an on-call over a weekend or a public holiday, if every nurse in theatre does everything, so they all do anesthetics, scout, and scrub nurse, or the majority of them, and recovery, then you've got a large pool of people you can swap on calls with.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you have a small group of specialized anesthetic nurses, there you have only a small pool of people where you can swap on calls, and that's why I've been told they don't like the idea. So they love the idea to be generalists, and it also makes it easier if people call in sick. It makes it easier to shuffle the roster to make sure that all the bases are covered.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I guess the other big difference is could you again kind of discuss how much leave, vacation time, and how much time you don't have to be at work? Because I think from the U.S. standpoint, this is going to be probably unbelievable, is my suspicion.
Yes. Okay. Right. Most people will now think that I'm lying. I am not. Okay. Right. Okay. Let's start with a normal week. I work 4 days a week. I've got 1 day off. The reason is that we do 4 times 9.5 hours. I'm contracted to work 76 hours per fortnight. A fortnight is 2 weeks. So 38 hours per week, 4 times 9.5 equals 38. So 1 day per week off. That is usually after my 24-hour on-call. On-call means I'm at home, I get called in for emergencies. It can be quite busy. And unfortunately, quite often you need that day off just to recover. Then in terms of leave, I get 5 weeks annual leave. It would be 4 weeks if I would not take part in the on-call roster, but because I take part in the on-call roster, I get 5 weeks annual leave. Then there is 2 weeks CPD leave, conference leave per year, which you can use to go for conferences. For example, next weekend I'm flying to Cairns in North Queensland, which is roughly, I think, 4,500 k's north of here, in the tropics for a conference. That's conference leave. And you also get conference, a certain amount of your salary is CPD money. So I'll get $23,000 per year for conferences and education. Then you get sick leave. That's a certain amount of hours per fortnight you work. And the longer you work, and if you're not sick, if you don't use that sick leave, that accumulates. And at the moment, I've got enough sick leave. I could be off work for 40 weeks and still getting paid my full salary during that time.
How many weeks?
And then 40.
40. Oh gosh.
Yeah. I'm here since almost 12 years now, and I've never been sick for a longer period of time. There was the odd day where you had whatever GE or the cold or whatever. During COVID, I didn't have to use my own sick leave. That was COVID leave. That was out of that. So when I had COVID in April, I couldn't come to work because legally I was not allowed to enter the hospital, or actually to leave my property. Now, but the nicest things are, and that sounds completely unbelievable for you guys, because it did for me. Every 5 years, I get 13 weeks sabbatical leave. This is leave for upskilling and reskilling. So you can go to another hospital, to another country, do things you usually don't do at your hospital, and just to reskill or upskill or learn new things. And as long as it is related to anesthetics or whatever you do at your hospital, that is covered. So I was, when you asked me, Melissa, whether I would take part in this podcast, I was actually in Germany, working at a hospital in Germany, just doing a bit of ultrasound guided regional anesthesia, because they do it regularly. We don't do it that often in our hospital. So I went to Germany for 5 weeks to flee the Tasmanian winter, to enjoy the German summer, see my parents, see friends, and to work at that hospital. And that was fully paid. So 13 weeks every 5 years for professional development. And then every 10 years, you get 13 weeks long service leave, which is just holiday. So it's 13 weeks extra annual leave every 10 years, where you can do whatever you want. So at the moment, if I count it all together, so excluding the sick leave, I think I've got around 30 weeks leave on my leave account at the moment, because I'm already haven't had enough time to be eligible for the long service leave, haven't taken it yet. I still have plenty of sabbatical leave left, and I've got some annual leave left. But
so those 13 weeks for the 13 professional weeks is at 5 years, and then the 13 weeks of general whatever you want at 10 years. Those don't go away until you use them.
The long service leave doesn't go away. That just accumulates, and the sabbatical leave, that basically expires after 5 years. Whatever you haven't taken after 5 years goes away, because then you get the next 13 weeks.
Oh yeah.
So what happened to me was that in 2020 I had 4 weeks sabbatical leave left from the period 2015 till 2020, and my plan was to go to Germany in May, June 2020 for sabbatical leave, and that was all. The leave forms were signed off, everything was done, the flights were booked, the arrangement with the German hospital was done, the accommodation was booked, everything was already wrapped up completely when COVID hit the shores of Australia. And then the government cancelled all leave. So there was an email to all employees in the Tasmanian Health Service. Or I should mention that if you work in the public system as a medical professional in Australia, you are a public servant. You are employed more or less by the government. I mean, I'm employed by the Tasmanian Health Service, which at the end of the day is under the auspice of the Australian government, of the Tasmanian government. So the government sent out an email: all leave is cancelled, irrespective of what type of leave. All leave for all personnel is cancelled, because no one had any idea what's going to happen with COVID. So I said, yep, too bad. I'll just wait until the end of 2020 then, because everyone thought, oh yeah, it's going to be a few weeks and then everything will be fine, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and then whatever, everyone had it and everyone will be immune and it won't be that bad and whatever. We all saw the videos, the news, or actually I saw the news from Italy and everything. So I thought that looks pretty bad. But anyway, I was still optimistic that I could go to Germany at the end of 2020. But yeah, now Australia closed the border, and I was sort of in the largest outdoor prison of the world for 2 years, because nobody could leave Australia except an exception. Reminded me of East Germany, where you couldn't leave the country without a permit. However, the reason that people couldn't leave Australia was pretty self-explanatory, and it actually led to the fact that Australia got away pretty good with COVID. So it wasn't as bad here as in other countries. So anyway, I said, hang on, these 4 weeks sabbatical leave, they're going to expire in October 2020, but that's not fair, because I wanted to take them. I wanted to go to Germany. Everything has been booked. You told me I'm not allowed to go. And they said, fine, we roll it over to 2021, what usually doesn't happen, because in October 2020, I got the next 13 weeks. And then 2021 Australia's border were closed. You couldn't go anywhere. It wasn't even possible to travel from Tasmania to one of the other federal states like Victoria, New South Wales, because the borders within Australia were closed. So Tasmania was great. Actually, to be honest, I loved it. Tasmania, we did not have any COVID at all between June 2020 and December 21. Wow. COVID did not exist in Tasmania. We didn't have any cases. We didn't have any restrictions, no mask wearing, nothing. It was business as usual, except that there weren't any tourists, which means there was less traffic, and you could get a hotel room by just calling the hotel. Hey, I need a room for tonight. Yeah, sure, sir. What time will you be here? And I two weekends away, 2 road trips in Tasmania during that time, and I just hit the road. I was driving and just turning left and right randomly, and ended up at nice places, and decided, I'm going to stay here overnight, and just called the hotel and got a room, and everything was fine. The Tasmanian government handed out vouchers for $300 so that people would do holidays in their own state. I mean, there wasn't, not that there would have been any alternatives because you couldn't leave anyway. But yeah, traveling between the states was very complicated. You needed a permit to enter other states. You needed a permit to go back to Tasmania. There was always the risk that if you were at a hotspot, if any area has been declared a hotspot, that Tasmania wouldn't let you in. Even as a resident of Tasmania, they probably wouldn't let you in. They would have let me in because I'm a doctor, which means I'm a critical worker, but I would need to go into quarantine for 2 weeks and all these things. So yeah, anyway, in 2021, I said, well, hey guys, what are we going to do with these 4 weeks sabbatical, which are expiring now in October 21? Because I can't go anywhere. I can't even go to the mainland. Yeah, that's fine. We've rolled it over to 2022. And then when the international borders in Australia, when the border opened on the 1st of December 2021, I've been told, well, no, you have to take it in 2022, otherwise it's going to expire. So I went to Germany for 5 weeks this year, and I've still got, I think, 12 weeks sabbatical leave or 13 weeks left over.
I just have to say, that is one of the coolest things I've ever heard, because if you're getting professional sabbatical at 5 years to basically update your medical skills, that is something that should be instituted everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I just think about in the United States, because we have a lot of physicians and a lot of aging physicians, and not to say that all of them are not up to date on their skills, but things change. And certainly within the last 20 years, medical practice, and particularly procedural medical practice, has changed tremendously. So building into the system where you're now making sure that your staff has the opportunity to update their skills. And I'm kind of assuming where Bernie is, I don't know what or how you guys do level of care. Like in the United States, we have level 1, level 2, level 3. What the acuity is, because there are certain operations, if you're not doing, you may not feel comfortable doing, and gallbladder is gallbladder, but if you're doing some sort of a gastrectomy or something that's a little bit more involved, being able to know, have been somewhere where you update your skills would be a very, very positive thing, rather than 10 or 15 years later knowing that you have to do something that you probably haven't done for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, that's right. Look, to answer that question, the hospital here, it's a regional hospital. We've got 100, how many beds do we have? 100 beds, 160 beds, can't remember. I think total of 160 beds. It's a small hospital. What we do is, gallbladders, heavy colectomies, total hip replacement, total knee replacement, shoulder replacements, emergency, whatever comes through the door, if it can't be flown out to Hobart. Our tertiary referral centre is the Royal Hobart Hospital in Hobart, which is the largest hospital in Tasmania. They do all the big stuff. They do cardiac, they do neuro, they do the gastrectomies. We could do a gastrectomy in Burnie. I'm pretty sure our surgeons are capable, and we are certainly capable to anesthetize these patients. But the more complex things here, said, like cardiac or neuro or peripheral surgery or these things, they would not be done in Burnie. Because simply it's a small hospital, that's one thing. The other thing is that, for example, We don't have a large urology department. We don't do any urology in Burnie. There's a bit of urology happening at the Mersey Hospital, but it's just day cases. Because the Mersey Hospital is mainly a day case hospital, they don't have many overnight patients, and it's Monday to Friday. After 5 o'clock between Monday and Friday, and on the weekend and public holidays, there's neither an anaesthetist present nor a surgeon present at the Mersey Hospital, which is in La Trobe. Whereas here in Burnie, we've got 24/7 cover for everything. However, the complex elective surgery gets sent to Hobart immediately, or to Melbourne on the mainland. Emergencies, depending on what it is, if there is time to safely fly the patient with a helicopter to Hobart, the patient gets flown out. And if not, by all means, then we just deal with whatever comes through the door. But you're right, this upskilling thing, it's very good. It's very important. I think it actually should be every physician should be enabled to do that, just to look over your own horizon. Because if you work in the same place for a certain period of time, you develop tunnel vision. Because you do the same thing over and over and over again, and you actually don't realize that there are other things and there are other ways to do things, and you lose your skills, because you become pretty good at what you do because you do it every day. But all the things you've done before, where you worked in other places and you stop doing them, after 10 years, you can't do them anymore. I mean, the hospital where I worked in Germany, we did hemihepatectomies, we did Whipples, we did radical cystectomies, we did radical prostatectomies, and all these things, big cases, where you have central line, thoracic epidural, arterial line, 5 syringe drivers, patient goes to ICU posted, and all these things. We don't do that here. The last time I put a thoracic epidural catheter in, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably, because we don't do them here, because the nurses don't want them on the ward. That's another difference. What I found out between Germany and Australia is that the nurses in Australia are far more powerful than in Germany. In Germany, if I say this patient can go to the ward, the patient goes to the ward. That's it, end of story, because that's my decision, because I'm the doctor. Whereas in Australia, if the nurse says, I'm not accepting this patient because of X, Y, Z, fine, she's not accepting the patient, which means I can't send the patient to the ward. I have to fix that first so that the nurse is happy. If that would happen in Germany, that nurse would be standing in front of the medical director the next day and would get her papers handed over. So find a new job. Whereas in Australia, if I make a big fuss, I would stand in front of the medical director getting told off.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that was quite a difference. Yes, so you're right. This upskilling thing, these 13 weeks every 5 years, it's fantastic. I don't want to make you guys envious, but in addition to my normal salary, which just keeps coming in, it's a monthly salary, I also get a daily allowance if I'm overseas, so that I don't have to sleep under the bridge and that I don't have to walk all the time. So they pay you a daily allowance, so they can hire a car, you can stay at a hotel, you can buy food, and all these things. So that comes in addition and on top of your normal salary as well. And for every 5 year cycle, they include the airfare up to the price of around the world economy ticket. So every 5 years, if I go overseas for sabbatical, I can claim the airfare back up to that amount. So I just look up around the world economy class ticket of a decent airline. So this is what around the world economy class ticket would cost, and that's the money they reimburse me.
Wow, that's crazy.
Amazing.
So speaking of not just benefits, because you mentioned it very briefly, you get car, just it's beyond. We'll go into that, but I'm curious in the upskilling part. I know that the big difference I've noticed, and there's maybe some hesitation, from someone who's from the United States that wants to go down to Australia or New Zealand, because these are some of the things I've looked at in the past, is that our training, we might do ICU training during our residency, during our anesthesia residency, and you get skilled in that. But many times once you finish your training in the US, you're not necessarily doing ICU or, of course, obstetrics can be very siloed in some places too, where you may not do OB depending what kind of group you're in with anesthesia or what facility. But it seems like ER and ICU, definitely in New Zealand, is like kind of that skill set you need. You kind of do everything. And it sounds like you did some of that too in Germany. But from the expectations of the skills you need, such as the hospital you're in, how would you describe the expectations of an anesthesiologist or anaesthetist there?
Right. So in Australia, anesthetics, intensive care medicine, and emergency medicine are 3 different fields with 3 different colleges and 3 different training pathways. So if you are an anaesthetist, or if you go through the training in Australia to become a FANSCA, a fellow of the Australian New Zealand College for Anaesthetists, you are trained as an anaesthetist. You do some ICU. You do half a year ICU. During a training as well, but that's it. You are employed as an anaesthetist. You do anesthetics. Your colleague on the intensive care unit, he's a fellow of the College of Intensive Care Medicine, and he's trained specifically in intensive care medicine. They have to do 1 year anesthetics, but otherwise they do intensive care medicine. And in the emergency department, these guys there are FACEMs, fellows of the Australian College of Emergency Medicine. They have to do half a year anesthetics to get airway skills. But at least at my hospital, they usually call us to intubate patients, or very often at least. So as an anaesthetist, you are not heavily involved in emergency medicine or intensive care medicine per se. However, the patient that ends up on the operating table might come from the intensive care unit, or might be septic or whatever. So you need your intensive care medicine skills or your emergency medicine skills in the operating theatre as well. However, you are not dealing with these patients on a daily basis directly. Whereas in Germany, anesthesia is comprised out of 4 pillars, which is anesthesia, intensive care medicine, emergency medicine, and pain medicine. As an anaesthetist in Germany, you do all these 4 things depending on where you work. So when I worked in Germany, I was the intensivist for 18 months, which means I was on ICU every day from Monday till Friday. But when I was on call or on duty for 24 hours, I also was in theatre. And during that time, I also carried the emergency beeper for the mobile intensive care unit. So I did all these things, and I did pain therapy for chronic pain patients a little bit on the side as well. Whereas here, now I'm just doing anesthetics, nothing else.
Okay. And so back to the benefits, there's all these other extraneous things too. You're provided a car. And why is that?
That's part of the contract. That's part of the contract that has been negotiated between the Tasmanian Society of Surgery Medical Practitioners and the government. And it's not only Tasmania, it's pretty much in every state of Australia. You either get an allowance or you get a car. So part of my contract is a fully maintained car, including insurance, maintenance, tires, and a fuel card every 3 years. So at the moment, I'm having a Kia Sorento GT line, which is due to be replaced, I think, next year in April. As I said, that includes the fuel card, which means that I don't have to worry about petrol prices because I just swipe the card and the bill goes to the Tasmanian government. Wow. There is a communication allowance. When I started to work, they gave me a mobile phone, which was just an ordinary, mobile phone these days. I already had a Nokia smartphone at that time, and said, look, I mean, that phone, that's rubbish. I've got my own phone. And I would like to use my own phone. I don't want to walk around with 2 phones in my pocket because we don't have pages in the hospital. We have mobile phones. So if I'm in theatre, everyone wants to contact me. They just call me on my mobile phone number. That's private calls and business calls, whatever. I've only got 1 phone number. And they said, yeah, fine, okay, which is pay your mobile phone bill. And that over the time with the negotiations of the industrial agreement, which happens every 2 or 3 years, that has changed to a communications allowance, which means at the moment, I don't know, I think they pay me $1,600 or $1,900 a year to maintain my mobile phone contract with them. Unlimited calls, unlimited text message, and I think massive data allowance, so that the hospital can contact me. There's also I think I can get reimbursed for my home internet, because part of the home, because I'm working from home with COVID. We've been sent home to work from home. You do non-clinical time from home, so I need an internet connection, and that I could get reimbursed as well. You have to fill in a payment claim form and all these things, and yeah, whatever. I couldn't be bothered. I just didn't do it. But,
can I clarify your work hours too? Because you're taking a 24-hour call once a week. So you're
okay. So I'm on a 1 in 5 on-call ratio. That means that basically I have to do 6 on-calls in 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
However, that only applies to the days I'm available to work. So if I take 2 weeks leave, that number goes down to 3 on-calls, because it's a 1 in 5 ratio of the days I'm available to work.
So they're not stacking, like I know in a lot of anesthesia practices in the States, they'll, like, if you go on vacation, but they'll then say, well, now you're going to make up all your calls that you missed.
That's what happened to me in the hospital in Germany, simply because we only had a certain amount of people, and if someone went on leave, the other ones would have needed to do their own calls, which would be a punishment. But the point is, if you look at it, it's completely stupid.
Uh-huh.
Okay, why do you go on leave? Because you need to recover. Okay, so let's say you go on leave for 2 weeks, and then you have to do 6 on calls in 2 weeks rather than 6 on calls in 4 weeks. So either you do them before you go on leave, and you're basically dead before you go on leave, and you need 4 weeks to recover, or you do them after you had your 2 weeks off, and then the effect of having had leave is completely gone after 2 weeks after doing 6 on calls. It doesn't make any sense at all to do it this way.
Yeah, it's like so much. It doesn't. And then they'll say, so you got your Q5 call, and then you said, but outside of call, your contract is for 38 hours a week. So that's,
yes.
So 4 9.5-hour days. Now, does that count like when you get to the hospital, or is that for only operating room time?
No. That's basically I rock up at 8, and it's basically any time from 8 till 5:15.
Wow.
So
okay.
we start at 8 o'clock in the morning. I could be there earlier, but nothing would happen because the surgeon wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
The nursing staff would be there already, and the patient would be, they would get the patients ready. But if I would be there at, let's say, 7:30, I could check the anesthetic machine, I could prepare the drugs and all these things, then I could have another cup of coffee and then start to work. But there is also my registrar. Now, I've just a little explanation about the different words we use here in Australia for the different grades of doctors. Okay, so in general, so let's start at the bottom. An intern, that's someone who has finished medical school, 5 years medical school, first year out of medical school. That's the intern, the internship. It's a paid position. You have to apply for it. You work in the hospital as a ward cover. You rotate through different fields like medicine, surgery, gynae, or whatsoever. Then the next step is a resident medical officer. The residency, that's the first year or first 2 years after your internship. And you also rotate through various fields. And then you can apply for a position as a registrar after that time. A registrar is a doctor in training. And you apply at the hospital for anesthetics, surgery, or whatsoever to get into the training program. The training programs are run by the colleges here in Australia. So the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists is responsible for the training program in anesthetics. The Royal College of Anaesthetists is Royal Australian College of Anaesthetists is responsible for the surgical training, and so on. And if you get a job, a position in the training system as a registrar, then you work there. And depending on which state you're in, you either have to reapply every year for a new position, or in Tasmania, if you get a rotational position, You don't have to apply anymore. You are in the training program for 5 years, and you work in the 3 hospitals in Tasmania that do training, which is the Royal Hobart Hospital, the Launceston General Hospital, and the Northwest Regional Hospital in Burnie. And you do your 5-year training, you sit your exams, you pass your exams, and then eventually you will be a fellow of the College of Anaesthetists and can apply for consultant position. So we are part of the training scheme here in Tasmania, which means we have registrars, we have doctors in training, and usually there is a consultant, a specialist, aka me, and a registrar teamed up in theatre together. So I'm teaching the registrar, and the more experience the registrar gets, the longer the leash is I'll let them on. And that also means that at a certain stage, the registrar is basically doing pretty much everything, just supervising them. So if I come in the morning, my registrar arrives at the same time, or they're already there, and they draw up the drugs, they check the machine, and they talk to me about the first patient and say, whatever, first patient is Mrs. X, she's 50 years old, a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, she's got asthma, hypertension, da. And my plan is this, this, and this. And I say, yep, fine, sounds reasonable, go ahead. And then I'm just there. They pre-oxygenate, I push the drugs. Or if they want me to, I'm just sitting in the corner and just watch them and then give them feedback afterwards. No, coming in earlier, yeah, I could have another cup of coffee, but to be honest, the coffee at home is better. And then staying longer doesn't make any sense either, because at some stage we're running out of theatre staff, because the nursing staff, they knock off at a certain time, and then there's only the on-call team left over. There's an on-call operating theatre team, there's an on-call anaesthetist, an on-call registrar, which means that it doesn't make any sense at all for me to stay longer, because there's nothing to do for me.
All right, nice. I got one more question here. I apologize we've been taking up so much of your time, but this is absolutely
that's all right.
Like
after time.
It is like mind blowing. But in the United States, we have a huge burnout rate when it comes to physicians, and so what I'm really kind of curious is, as compared to, well, what was because you have great experience, your experiences in Germany as a practicing, like what was your work-life balance, and how happy were you, and how content were you, and were this something that you felt you could do forever, versus your experiences now in Tasmania? And that's what I really want to know, because where I'm going with this is, there's a lot of people here who are working themselves to death so that they can escape medicine. And one of the arguments I'm always like, well, if you actually have a place that you like that has really, really good work-life balance, then you don't necessarily need to escape anything. And that just seems to be healthier for a longer period of time. So I'm just kind of worried or concerned. I'm wondering what the kind of work-life balance, do you enjoy what you do? And can you see yourself doing this for a long period of time? I guess that's a summary question of that very long, drawn out kind of thing.
Right, compared to Germany, definitely, yes. And yes, you're right. Plenty of people work themselves to death and they actually don't know why they're doing it. Certainly, it's not as bad here. So let's compare to Germany. In Germany, I spend on average 100 hours per week in the hospital. Because in Germany, the on-call had to be done in the hospital. You were basically on duty. You were in the hospital for 24 hours because I looked after the intensive care, the ICU patients, which means I had to sleep in the hospital. And even if it was quiet at night, I was still at work because I was in a room in the hospital, which was, it was a nice room. What we had there, it was basically a one-bedroom apartment with view to the garden. But still, you're in the hospital, you're not at home, you're not with your family, you're not with the kids. And doing 6 on-calls and anesthetics plus 3 on-calls as emergency and retrieval doctor on the emergency ambulance per month in Germany. So that's 9 on-calls, that's 9 times 24 hours you're in the hospital. And plus the usual daytime work, which starts at 7:30 and officially finishes at 4 o'clock, but quite often there's overtime. And I worked in hospitals in Germany where this overtime wasn't paid and wasn't recognized. You didn't get time off for it and you didn't get paid for it. It was just expected that you are there until 5, 6 o'clock, until the work is done. So basically in Germany, you don't go home before all the work is finished. End of story. No matter how long it takes, that's the way it is. You're a doctor. Suck it up. Have a cup of concrete. Whereas, so that was pretty tough. And to be honest, in hindsight, that was a bad thing for me because I missed so many milestones with my children. And my children have been raised by my wife, not by me. And there were times in Germany where I thought about hanging a picture of myself in the kitchen so that the children know who that strange guy is who's shaving himself in the bathroom in the morning. Because there were times where I was, I left work, the kids were still asleep. I left home, the kids were still at home asleep, and I came home and they were already in bed. So I know what you're talking about. Whereas here, work-life balance much better. As I said, it's 30 hours per week, it's 5 on-calls per month if I'm not on leave. The on-calls, I do them from home, which means that I start at 8 in the morning, and then depending on what's on the emergency list in the afternoon, I'm busy until 6. Then we've got a tea break, and if there's something else left, we just keep going until 9, and that's it. And after 9 o'clock or after 8:30, it's only life or limb-threatening things because if the patient hasn't left recovery until 9:30 in the evening, we have to call the night shift staff in, the night shift nursing staff, and they get paid 200%, which makes it pretty expensive for the hospital. So you think twice about whether this operation is absolutely necessary this evening, or could it be done the next day or another day. So usually, you go home and you're probably home at 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and then you sleep in your own bed, which is quite different. The only thing when you have to get up in the middle of the night is either a Cat 1 C-section or something really, which needs to be done. For example, when I was on call last week, I got called at midnight for an incarcerated hernia. Well, that's a true blue emergency that needs to be done immediately. So yes, you get up, you go to the hospital. I was back home at 3 o'clock in the morning, but at least I slept in my own bed. So work-life balance here is definitely better than in Germany. And from what I can hear from you, it's definitely better than in the United States. And let me ask you a question. How many annual leave or how many leave do you get per year?
It depends who you ask. A typical small group in my region, I'm in Texas, but I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks for the anesthesiologists, 5 weeks, but there's no CME or continuing medical education. I think you called it CPD, continuous professional development. But there are big groups where they work them like dogs, but they could have like 12 weeks of vacation. But you're putting your pound of flesh in order to attain that. And there's usually 2 or 3 years to partnership at least. If you're getting into these big groups. I've never been part of the big groups. Now I'm a solo independent anesthesiologist that right now does general anesthesia for 2 plastic surgeons. So I'm not an employee, so I don't have any benefits from anybody but from myself. So I kind of, save and arrange for having time off and all of those things. So I think it just depends on the environment you're in. But to me, it's not just the weeks, because like Kevin was saying, sometimes they'll compress the calls and, you're beat, before or after your vacation. So, I think it's just a different mindset and work is like a kind of a badge of honor in this country, and being busy is like,
I don't even know if it was a badge of honor though. A lot of it is the economics of how these economics and then the whole surgical relationship. But when you have surgeons that are paid to do operations, there's a huge pressure to do lots and lots of operations. So the idea that you are on call and going home at 9 when you're in the call OR call theater is unbelievable. Like most of the time that would be like second call, it was getting home at 9. The first call person is probably going to be after midnight on a good day. When it comes to time off, like so I don't do anesthesia anymore. I did pain specifically. So the last time I did any sort of anesthesia was when I was in the military. But you kind of sound like a group when I was graduating, and I was like, oh man, I'd love to join this group, except I had a military commitment. And they had it set up where they were in a small hospital. I think there were 4 anesthesiologists. And so what it ended up doing is they were taking roughly, or maybe there's 5. Anyway, they were taking 1 or 2 calls a week, but they were only 4 days in the week. And they were trying to get like another 1 or 2 anesthesiologists. So ultimately they would have, it ended up, they were having around 12 weeks a year because of the way they set up the schedule. I do know of groups where they can get up to, these are big groups in Texas, actually, one of the friends that I was talking to just recently, where they have a call pool, and you can, as you go and see owner, you can get 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 weeks, but your call stack, that's exactly, I asked that question because so I literally just talked to my friend about this. He's like, yeah, they say that this, and then I just took 3 weeks off or whatever, but because I missed all those calls, now I have to make all those calls up. And so he's freaking beat, like just like you said, you go on vacation, you come back and you just get pounded. So it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Like just blows my mind. Like
I don't think we're really good at centering around wellness in this country at all. It's not a priority, and just seems like the priorities are we're incentivized, of course, money and other things, and this whole medical industrial complex that we talk about a lot on our podcast is it drives this machine, so to speak. But like you're saying, Kevin, you kind of have to have your own little group, have it small and control the situation in order to even try to possibly create it, despite the way that the industry is. And that's a struggle too. But in anesthesia, you're following a lot of times, it's this weird dyad with the surgeon where you kind of, I feel like they're like this shark that's, making the money, and you're that little fish that sucks onto them and holds on, and because that's how you make your money is off their surgery.
Well, this is part of the thing. So you have a national health system, and then you have a private option. And so the incentives completely change. The incentives here, and this was an early lesson I learned, I think in medical school, was talking to one of the surgeons, and I think I was mentioning I liked anesthesia, and he goes, the one problem with anesthesia is you don't control the patients, and he who controls the patients has the power. And that's very true when you're in a for-profit, in a private system, because that's where the income is. And so there's an incentive to do lots of things. And if you are a surgeon who brings in lots of dollars, your anesthesiologists don't have a lot of say. I mean, Melissa can probably talk stories about trying to do the right thing and being told, oh, that's not the right thing, because the surgeon wants to do the money thing, and that's the right thing. So it's a very, very different environment. But we've kept you here for a long time. And we're gonna have to get you back on the podcast, I think, so you can just tell us some more crazy details about what practice is like down there. But I know, particularly if we have any anesthesiologists listening to this podcast, which there are a couple, they're going to probably want to know more about your life. And so is there a place that you would direct them to get more information on, if they wanted to, if you wanted to work in Australia or in Tasmania, how would that process, what's the first step that you would recommend for them to do?
I think the best thing would be just go on the website of ANZCA, the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists. So just type ANZCA, ANZCA into Google. That should give you the website of ANZCA. Hang on, I just have a look myself. What it exactly is.
That's how I found it.
Yep, I see it.
Yeah. So ANZCA, hang on. Yeah. So it's www.anzca, so anzca.edu.au. That's the website of the college, and there's a section called SIMG, Specialist International Medical Graduates. You can just click on that, and that tells you pretty much everything about the process, what you need to do if you want to work in Australia as a specialist anaesthetist. And job-wise, there's still a shortage of specialists in Australia. Funny enough, not in the big centres. So Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, they've got enough anaesthetists there. However, everything outside of these centres is there. There are still open positions. We've got 4 open positions in our hospital here. As far as I know, Launceston has 10 open positions. The reason for that is that for most Australians, everything which is more than 100 kilometres away, so 60 miles roughly away from Sydney or Melbourne or any big metropolitan centre, is outback. That's bush. Okay, so I mean,
they make jokes about you guys, right? In Tasmania, they have jokes about Tasmanians.
Oh, yes. So one is that people in Tasmania have 2 heads. So people born in Tasmania have 2 heads, which is true, because what usually happens is one head contains the brain, the other one is empty. The empty one gets removed, and you can see the scar and true blue Tasmanians, and gets sent to the mainland, and they make mainlanders out of that.
Oh my God.
I had colleagues when I went to conferences on the mainland, or when I was at the World Congress of Anesthesia in Hong Kong in 2016. I tried to, recruit people, ask, hey, would you like to work in Tasmania? Yeah, maybe in Hobart. That's the big hospital in the south. The big city, which is a tiny city compared to other big cities. And I said, no, Northwest Coast. Oh, do you have electricity up there? So there's some people really think, that well, we don't have electricity, we don't have water. We still have a well in the front yard and a dunny in the backyard. So yeah, it is remote where I work, but it's still, we got roads, we got seated road, we've got traffic lights, we've got police. If you're speeding, they're gonna give you a fine. So it's not the Wild West out here. But we've got nature. We got lots of nature. If I drive an hour west from here, the world ends. That's it. So it's 1.5 hours from here. I'm at the edge of the world, which is on the west coast of Tasmania, and from that point, it is 15,000 kilometers to the west before I would hit the next landmass, which would be South America, the tip of South America. And that's the reason why Tasmania has the cleanest air in the world, because our winds are mostly westerly winds. So that means all the air that arrives in Tasmania had 15,000 kilometers to get cleaned over the ocean before it arrives in Tasmania. Because we don't have heavy industries in Tasmania, we don't have any air pollution at all. And the place where I live, we live on tank water. We got 2 20,000 gallon rainwater tanks in the garden, and all the rainwater from the roof gets collected there, and that's our drinking water. That's the water we use in the house. And we've got the grey water goes in the bush, and the black water goes into a septic tank. So we don't get a water bill.
What about
and
your
this water?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Now I gotta know, seasonal allergies. How bad are your allergies down there? Or are there a lot of allergens, like pollens and things?
Oh, look, I mean, I think if you suffer from hay fever, you would suffer from hay fever here as well, because we've got pollinating plants here as well. I suffer from hay fever. Some years it's bad, some years it's not as bad. I think it depends on. I reckon there are a few plants there that probably only flower every 3 or 4 years. But otherwise, just I reckon it's not worse than anywhere else. The funny thing when you say allergies is that the word allergy is used in an over inflated or way here. If you know, on the anaesthetic records, they've got this field, this box allergies, and we've got patients that are allergic to everything under the sun here, because every side effect allergy. Patients are allergic to morphine. Oh, what happens? Oh, it makes me feel sick. Yeah, well, that's not an allergy. That's a side effect. I had a patient who was allergic to adrenaline the other day. What happens with adrenaline? Oh, it makes my heart go fast. Well, don't think. Yeah, you have to be careful with the word allergy here because people are allergic to almost everything. Most of the time, it's just side effects. Yeah, but hay fever, you can get that everywhere in the world, unless you move to Antarctica or to the North Pole. Then I reckon you should be pretty good there. However, just give climate change another 20 or 30 years, and then you've got hay fever in Antarctica as well. Otherwise, some people are allergic to jack jumpers, which are pretty big ants, a bit nasty. Yeah. They can be allergic to that. And but I've been bitten once by one. I didn't react to anything, but maybe that was the initial contact with the toxin. Maybe next time I got a bite from a jack jumper, I might have an allergic reaction. Who knows? I try not to get bitten because it's not really very nice. And contrary to other beliefs, not everything tries to kill you in Australia. I mean, yeah, we got sharks, we got crocodiles, we got venomous spiders, we got venomous snakes, we got venomous octopus, fish, and whatsoever. Platypus, they've got a venomous spur at the hind leg. But if you let common sense prevail, you actually safe here, except for the drop bears. They are really dangerous. You know about the drop bears? The drop bears? Drop bears. The D-R-O-P, drop. They drop from a tree. They drop from a tree and bite you in the neck.
Is that a joke?
They look like koalas, similar, but they've got very large fangs. They're hiding in the forest, waiting for tourists. And the best way to prevent an attack is to sprinkle your head with your own urine.
Okay, this is not going to be good if people are really listening to this. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. That's
a classic trope.
Yes, well, there's no doubt that you are just a bundle of energy and jokes, and we're so grateful. Not even for that, but just for the comparison of what you've gone through between Germany and Australia / Tasmania. Actually, there's a lot of people out there that may not realize Tasmania is an island state of Australia. If you don't know that, you might want to look on the map. Or read a little bit of history. And I want to thank you for just spending your time. Like Kevin said, I'm looking forward to, maybe we could talk about the process, because I know you've been really involved with people that do want to come to Australia and work as a physician. And I think there's a lot more interest, probably because there are a lot of burned out physicians in the United States. So I think it might behoove the audience at some point down the road, even if it's early next year, maybe we can chat about what's involved, if you'd be open to that one day.
Yeah, sure. No problem at all.
Okay. Well, Kevin, is there any last comments you want to say before taking us out?
I think we can just take us out. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us today. I was just still a little overwhelmed by all the discussion that we had. Someday we have to see your dog too. We're really appreciative that they came in early in the podcast here. But thank you again, really. Thank you.
Hello.
Oh, you guys, if you are listening to this on the audio, you got to go to our YouTube station, The Change Physician on YouTube, so that you can see the cute dog here. But thank you again, sir, for joining us. Thank you for the audience. I hope you are as interested in this as I am to hear what it's like to practice in another location. And great to have you on the show today. Until next time, everybody, stay well.
Take care.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.